So it's been about 8 months since the M1 MacBook Air has been released, and in this video I wanted to talk about some pros that I've found over those months of using this machine, and also a couple of cons as well, because at the end of the day, while this is a super awesome machine, it does have a couple of flaws. Now, there are hundreds of other videos out there similar to this one, so I wanted to focus on a few key points in this video that you may not have heard before. By the way, thanks for Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Create professional looking websites without coding or software installations. More on that later. So the first pro of this machine is something you guys are already familiar with, but I don't think it's talked about enough, and that is the fanless design. So the reason this is such a pro, in my opinion, is you can put this thing literally anywhere. So on top of a bed, sheets, a couch, on the ground, anywhere, because you don't have to worry about the exhaust vents at the back being able to suck in air. So you really can use it anywhere. And for someone who will often use this machine just relaxing, lying in bed or on a couch, that's such a game changer compared to the previous generation MacBook Airs, or even just a MacBook Pro, including the M1 MacBook Pro, because you need to leave room and a bit of space at the back for air to circulate. Now, the second pro to this feature is, of course, it's completely silent. So when you're doing Skype calls, or even if you're just watching a video on YouTube, the fan is never going to kick on, and it's never going to cause background noise or disrupt your viewing experience. Now, there are other fanless laptops out there, including one from Dell in the XPS lines, but none of them really come close to the sheer performance that you get in this particular model, because honestly, most of them are Chromebooks and they have very limited functionality. So to have such a powerful machine, as I've already talked about in previous videos, with no fan and be completely silent, that is a massive achievement and is a massive pro that I really don't hear talked about that much. Now, moving on to the second pro, and that is swap memory. And you guys might hear that and be a little bit confused, because there's been a lot of misinformation floating around out there surrounding swap memory, and specifically the Apple Silicon Max. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with swap memory and what it does, essentially if you max out your RAM, or you've used up all available RAM in your system is gonna move some tasks and some processes onto the internal SSD of your Mac. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna free up some RAM on your system to keep your system performing smoothly. Now, there are 3 things that constitute such a successful swap memory experience on this machine. That is the M1 SoC, the macOS operating system, and also the internal SSD. Now, starting with the M1 SoC, I won't go into it in too much detail, but it's just so tightly integrated and efficient that the overall performance of your Mac is just super fast to begin with. Now, moving on to macOS, macOS has had some pretty big updates over the years, including Big Sur, which was a massive one as well. And that just means that the system is able to perform again at a higher rate of performance, and it's also able to more intelligently move between swap memory and RAM to keep your machine performing very, very well. Now, the last contributing factor to this triangle is the internal SSD, or specifically the speed of the internal SSD. So it's rated at around 2800 megabits per second, which is super, super fast. Now, it's still nowhere near as fast as RAM, but having an internal SSD that fast that your system is swapping to means that you're barely going to notice a difference between RAM and swap memory. So in layman's terms, what does this mean? Well, if you've got a base model Mac and you're just doing typical tasks like web browsing and emails, you're probably not going to notice it. But if you are the type of person to occasionally really put this thing to the test, and you do some hardcore editing or some 3D modeling or insane multitasking, you probably won't even notice a difference, because the performance is going to be super, super fast, even if you're maxing out the memory and using swap memory at the same time. Now, before we get into the next point, a quick word from Squarespace.
Squarespace provides you with award-winning templates to help your site stand out. Build yourself a simple website in minutes by replacing text, images, and colors in your chosen template with your own, no coding required. Make any website, a personal portfolio, a resume, a shopping site, a blog, and more. Just choose a template, give your site a title, and you're ready to go. Squarespace has website analytics to help you keep track of how your website is doing and find weaker areas to help you get a steady flow of traffic. Rank higher by utilizing their SEO tools to increase the quality and quantity of your website traffic. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and once you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/creatortech to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Now, in addition to that last pro, the next pro is very similar, and that is just the sheer versatility of this machine. So this is a base model M1 MacBook Air, no upgrades, anything like that. And for light work, it's awesome. If you're just doing browsing or emails, your battery is gonna last anywhere between 12 to 14 hours. It's gonna stay nice and cool, which is pretty much unheard of for entry-level laptops out there, and including the previous generation Intel versions of this particular machine. But the other thing I wanna talk about is, for a lot of people, this is their only machine. They don't have a beefy Windows computer or an iMac Pro, for example. This is it. So if they do need to do something that's really intensive, like video editing or Photoshop manipulation, 3D modeling, or coding, for example, this machine can still do that as well. So I'm just very impressed with that, especially because this essentially is an entry-level device. Now, moving on to some negatives with this machine. Honestly, guys, there aren't many, but there are a couple that I do want to talk about. Now, the first one is not exactly limited to Apple or even the Apple Silicon Macs, and that is that the SSD is soldered on to this device, which means you cannot remove it or replace it. Now, on previous versions of the MacBook, you could actually open it up and take out the hard drive or the solid state drive and replace it. But in the last couple of years, Apple has started shipping these things with the SSD soldered on, and the M1 MacBook Air and even the MacBook Pro are no exceptions. So why is this such a negative? Well, no matter how much you look after this thing, at some stage in the future, it is going to fail, the SSD is going to die, and you're going to be left with a big paperweight. Now, this is why I'm such a big advocate of the right to repair, which means that if this was to fail, you could probably go to a third-party repairer, pay them $200, and they may be able to repair it for you. Because at this stage, Apple won't. They're gonna make you buy a brand new laptop, or they're gonna charge you hundreds or potentially even thousands of dollars to repair the SSD, because they basically have to rip the guts out of this thing and fully replace everything just for an SSD. Now, the other con I want to talk about is, again, a fairly general one, and it's not exactly a fault of this machine, but it's that there's a lot of hype and hysteria and misinformation out there about this machine, basically making it out to be a supercomputer, something that's gonna just blaze through everything. Guys, that is not the reality. It is a very powerful and capable machine in its own right, but for a lot of things out there, this is not a good idea. So for example, editing over about 4K. If you're doing simple 4K editing, it's fine, but anything over that, this will start to struggle. Likewise, with some relatively intensive 3D modeling like Blender, for example, or After Effects, and also some developers, they have run into issues with that just being not quite powerful enough. And I think the reason for this is, on the internet, this thing is typically branded as just a super powerful, super capable device, which it is, but I think that hype sometimes goes a little bit too far, and sometimes it tricks people into buying this when they should have realistically gone for a more powerful device, not necessarily an Apple one either, maybe even an XPS from Dell or some kind of Windows laptop with just more raw power. And I just thought I'd touch on that point because, again, it's not a fault of this machine. It's just that there is a lot of hype and hysteria out there with regards to the capability of this thing. Now, if there's one thing you should take away from this video, regardless of the pros and the cons, this is Apple's very first Apple Silicon chip. This is the absolute first generation, and it is the worst Apple Silicon chip we're ever going to see. All of the other chips we see from now on are going to be better than this one by probably multiple factors. And I'm not even talking about the M2 or the M1X chips coming in the next year. I'm really excited for the next 4 to 5 years in the future, because I think at that point, Apple's gonna refine the process. They're gonna have a lot of user data available and some testing, what not to do, what to do. And I think we're gonna be seeing some super, super powerful MacBooks in the next couple of years. And that is really exciting to think about. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching this video. If you liked what I talked about, and if you maybe want to add your own comment down in the comment section below, please do so. But apart from that, I'll catch you in the next one.